So first of all, I want to start by saying congrats on not crashing the Ferrari.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
It's crazy to realize that this is your first movie, which is it's crazy because most people start with like a smaller one.
That's true.
And you're like, I'm going to jump into something really complicated and hard, and I'm going to write and direct it and produce it, and just say screw it.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't say screw it, but I definitely was like, felt after having written and produced a lot of these movies, as you know, ready. Because, a lot of what I'd done in the past with these films and with some other films, but especially these, was sort of directorial because I'd worked with some directors who were open and collaborative and let me do, the kind of work that maybe some other directors would be more territorial about. So, I worked closely with the actors on these films. Doug Liman's another director. He's a very open, workshop-y director. I worked very closely with the actors on the films I made with him. I've been in post on movies. So the scale of this kind of film wasn't intimidating to me because it's the kind of movies I've been around for the last 15 years.
I'm always curious if you could go back in time to day one, because I'm sure walking on set that first day, there had to be butterflies.
Yeah, sure.
So what would you give yourself as advice if you could go back to that first day, if you had advice?
Eat a healthier breakfast. Honestly, the biggest surprise on this movie, as a director, the biggest difference between being what I've been in the past, which is like a creative partner, really, to directors, and being the director, is it demands a different kind of stamina. That when you're a writer-producer on a movie, even when you're really a creative force on it, you still have, between setups, between shots, time to check your phone, to make a phone call, to go meditate, do whatever you want to do. When you're the director, the second you call cut and people are moving the cameras around, there's 10 people waiting in line to ask you questions. So there is no break from the beginning of the day to the end of the day. And that kind of stamina is like, it demanded a different kind of diet for me, and just a different approach.
Did you, because I've heard that from other people, did you know that going in, or was it sort of like,
no.
It was when you got on set, you're like, oh, wait a minute, this is different?
It wasn't when I got on set. It was like about 2 weeks in. 2 weeks into the movie, I was like, are we like 4 or 6 weeks into the movie? And because my body was just tired.
Sure.
In a way that I almost never get tired. I mean, you know me, I work on a lot of things at the same time, and I enjoy doing that. I enjoy bouncing around the world. I enjoy bouncing around projects. This is a movie where I was so fully immersed in the film in a way that I've never been singularly immersed in a single story. And yet I was feeling myself tired, and so what I did is I just changed my nutrition. This is boring, but I just changed my nutrition, and instead of eating, a bowl of fruit in the morning, which was sugar that was spiking me up and making me crash, I was eating, protein and stuff like that.
Yeah, but it's very interesting though, because I've spoken to a lot of filmmakers and a lot of people, and they say that the marathon is what surprises them.
Right.
So obviously you wrote this, and
Right.
I'm curious, when you're sitting down at the computer, you're getting ready to go, who's the character that's easiest for you to write, and who's the one that you constantly go back to and say, oh, I did this this didn't come together?
I think having written a lot of these movies, obviously, and like you, and I'm sure everybody watching this, having read a lot of these comics, the person who has the clearest voice and is the easiest to write is Xavier, for me. Even though in this movie I do something slightly different with him and obviously make him a little bit more problematic as a character than we've had in the past, maybe a little bit more complex than we have in the past, he's an easier voice for me to write. I think the hardest voice for me to write, and I think he's a hard character, is Scott. I think Scott is a hard character to write because, on the one hand, there's a sort of innocence to him. On the other hand, that there's a strength that we try in these movies to give him, but he's never really the hero of these movies. And so it's a balancing act, and he's a hard character to write.
There's a sequence in the first 20 minutes, which we can talk about, which is when they go to space together. So all of them as a group. I love the sequence, and I think that it's something that like all of us X-Men fans have been, we want to see this, all of them as a team,
right,
working together. So how much fun was it to write that thing and also talk about filming it when you have all those actors together?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the things that when I went into this movie, I was like, one, I just want to tell a Dark Phoenix story that focuses on Jean, and I really focus on her as a character and try to make it as intimate and personal and emotional as possible. Do that properly, see the characters around her, the family, sort of split apart and react to it. Once I've done all of that and sort of outlined that and thought that through in my head, Now, what are the things that we haven't done in an X-Men movie before that I've always wanted to do in an X-Men movie? And maybe number one in that list was see them work as a team. Because in the comics and the cartoons, what we love is when they work as a team. And there aren't a lot of action sequences in previous X-Men movies where they really work as a team. Often they work against each other. A lot of the time they work sort of individually. But them working as a team excited me. And so I sat down for me, it was the first sequence that I wrote, not just in the movie, but like even before I wrote scenes that preceded it. I wrote it, I prevised it. I wanted it to feel as though they were this well-oiled machine of like a superhero team. And that's not something we've seen in the X-Men movies before. It was a lot of fun to direct with them because they were all in the X-Jet together, obviously at the same time, except for when a couple of them go to the Endeavor to save the astronauts. And it was it was complicated. It was complicated because it was some zero-G that we were creating. And a lot of visual effects, obviously, because they're out in space and there's explosions and all of that.
That wasn't all real?
Nope. I tried to make it as much practical as possible in this movie, but that was the one sequence that the studio would not give me the money to shoot in space.
Right. I definitely want to talk about the design of Dark Phoenix and how Sophie looks. Because talk about how you got to that point where there were a lot of different versions of the way she was going to look.
Sure. I mean, I thought a lot. Look, I looked a lot at the original comic, and I wanted this movie to be more grounded and real, and I wanted the expression of what was happening inside of her and that cosmic force inside of her to play out obviously visually in her face and to make it clear for the audience to know when she was losing control. And so that the feeling of that, what I wanted to create was the feeling that the thing inside her, that Phoenix force inside her, was pushing out. It's not that she's like cracking, though I liked the metaphor also of like cracking up as a human being, as a character, but it was this feeling as if literally her body couldn't hold the thing that was inside her anymore, and it was starting to crack as if it was going to split open, which to some extent eventually happens, but as if she was going to split open and that power inside of her was going to pour out of her or explode Sophie herself. And so those cracks that are meant to feel as three-dimensional as possible and not just like they're sort of, prosthetic on her, they're all visual effect, that those cracks are bulging out and pushing out from inside of her. And we, initially I looked at the notion of those cracks being kind of the same cosmic color that I imagined and was inspired by the comic for the Cosmic Force. And it started to look a little too cartoonish. And so I settled on something that was a little bit more, like orange in the orange-red universe.
Sure. How tough was it to get back Fassbender? Because he's been on what we call an extended hiatus.
Yes. I think with Michael, one, having made these movies for as long as I have now in different capacities, writer, producer, these lead actors have become my friends. And at the end of making Apocalypse, when we knew Brian wasn't going to direct the next movie, the actors came up to me and they were the ones that said, really, I should direct the next film, whatever it was. And Michael was one of them. It was all of them, Michael, James, Nick, and Jennifer. Jennifer, actually, most of all. And so, I think Michael, from the beginning, when I said I was going to direct the movie, he said he would support it and he would come back. So it wasn't that hard to get him back. The thing with all of these actors, and I would say Michael especially, but all of them, is they just want to do something different. They want to be challenged. They want the characters to evolve. They don't want to play the same character over and over again, even though it is the same character, So I had this idea also on my list of things that I wanted to do in other X-Men movies that I'd never been able to do is like create Genosha. So I talked to Michael about that. And he was really excited about being able to, live in this. He knows the comics well. He knows that world. And so the idea of building that world together was really exciting to him.
What was the last thing that you cut out of the movie that you didn't want to see go, and why?
Such a good question, Steve. The last thing that I cut out of the movie that I didn't want to see go, there's a scene, it'll probably be in the deleted scenes, I think. There's a scene between, there's a line from it in the trailer, actually. There's a scene between...
You can catch a little
of it in the trailer.
Right.
There's a scene between Charles and Scott in Cerebro where it's after Hank has left the mansion. Let's leave it at that. the scene. And Charles sees it, has a real emotional response to it, starts to head out of Cerebro. Scott's there with him. Scott's also dealing with everything that's happening, and Jean, the person that is the woman that he loves, losing control in her mind. And now Charles is kind of traumatized by losing Hank, who's been his right-hand man for all of these movies. And there's this, I wouldn't call it a confrontation, but this sort of breakdown from Charles in that scene. In the trailer, he says, "I don't know what to do. Don't ask me what to do. I don't know what to do." And I liked the scene a lot, but in truth, it was a scene that wasn't necessary in terms of the storytelling, and felt like it sort of, you wanted to go from the Nick scene to being back with Jean. And I tried really hard in this movie to not be away from Jean for too long ever in this film, partly because I think I have sort of maybe PTSD from X-Men The Last Stand, where I felt like so much of the movie is not about Jean. I really wanted this movie to be so squarely focused on Jean that there were things that I eliminated because I wanted to keep that focus on her.
I'm always curious, and listen, fans of these movies love the deleted scenes. They love what was cut. So I would imagine the Blu-ray is going to have stuff on it.
Yeah, it is.
Obviously for down the road, but
Sure.
Do you have a lot? Is there like 5 minutes of deleted scenes? Is there 10? Is there...
I don't know how many minutes there are. I think there's like 4 or 5 scenes, so it probably adds up to anywhere between 5 and 10 minutes. The scene that I think it didn't fit the ending of the movie anymore, but there's a great just acting scene from McAvoy again that would have been at the very end of the movie, but it's sort of bumped with the timing of the end of the movie in terms of where people are. So fans will see that in the deleted scenes. Again, it's not a big spectacle scene. It's not a big. It's
Sure.
just a drama scene. And you having seen the movie know that it's like a more grounded, dramatic, sort of intimate film than we've done in the X-Men franchise before, to a large extent, because I really wanted to get back to a character-driven place. I felt like with Apocalypse, we got really a little bit more focused on spectacle and scale and lost some of the character, and there were so many characters in that movie that like nobody really got the kind of arcing that you want to give characters in a movie, even in an ensemble movie. So at any rate, it's a little scene that Charles has. It's monologue to himself, but I love it. And that was hard to see go to, but had to go because it literally didn't fit in the film anymore.
Yeah, I don't want to obviously reveal anything especially for the people in the room, but how did you decide? The very end of the movie is a cool scene. Did you always know that was the ending, and like sort of how did you get to it? And were there other things you were thinking about with the ending?
I always wanted to end the film with those characters, to keep it vague, because I felt as though, from the beginning of, and I feel like you and I have talked about this in the past, from the beginning of this process, and it's just ironic now given the Disney of it all, but from the beginning of writing this, which is 3 years ago, I always saw this as the culmination of this cycle of X-Men films. Not that there aren't going to be more X-Men films, obviously they are in whatever form they take, but I felt like for the X-Men First Class storyline of these strangers coming together, becoming the surrogate family, some of them enemies, some of them friends, in this movie the family being as strong as they can be at the beginning of it, and then being shattered from all of the different events that happen in this film, and then having to come together in a new form, felt like the culmination of however many movies it's been to get here. X-Men First Class, Days, Apocalypse, and now this. And the Dark Phoenix story for me, and I'm sure for you, is our most beloved story, and the most sort of enduring of the X-Men storyline. So I always saw this as a sort of culmination, and so as a result, because I think foundationally those characters in the last scene that you're talking about are at the core thematically of every X-Men movie. Even when Wolverine has been the star, they have been the core of the movie. Their philosophies are the sort of bedrock of the franchise. So I always imagined it would end with them. I didn't know what form it would take.